they're not your dots, and they might be the wrong dots anyway. So we need to be asking much more, more questions like, what are you noticing here, or which dots are you joining? Or rather than saying, so you've said this and this and this, and I'm drawing a conclusion that that's you, the coach, trying to add value because that's what you always did in the workplace. And that's not your role anymore as a coach.
Welcome to the Coaching Studio. I'm Lyssa, deHart, your host, and today I have the pleasure of sitting down with Clare Norman, MCC. With over 2 decades of experience, Clare has dedicated herself to raising the bar in the coaching profession. She is a sought-after mentor coach, coaching supervision partner, and she guides coaches to deepen their practice and refine their skill with a focus on what she calls marginal gains, those small, impactful shifts that can make a big difference over time. Clare's approach to coaching is all about empowering clients to think deeply, explore fresh perspectives, and take ownership of their journey. Known for her client-centered, non-directive style, she creates a space where people feel supported yet challenged, an environment where true transformation can happen. In addition to her impactful work with clients, Clare is an accomplished author. Her books, Mentor Coaching, A Practical Guide, The Transformational Coach, and her latest, Cultivating Coachability, reflect her commitment to professionalizing coaching. Each book provides practical insights and encourages coaches to examine their mindsets, readiness, and growth. Today, we'll dive into Clare's wisdom on coachability, mindset, and the evolving coaching landscape. I'm excited to share this conversation with you today. And Clare, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Lyssa. It is a pleasure to be here.
I have been really looking forward to this conversation. I am excited to really learn with you and have a fun conversation also. I tend to start this off with this idea of, how did you find coaching, or how did coaching find you? Like, what is the sort of genesis of where you are today?
Yeah, so my origin story around coaching came 23 years ago when I was heading up our Leaders of All Levels strategy within the organization I worked at. And I was looking for ways to transfer the learning out of the classroom and back into the workplace, because so often people got back in the workplace and all those wonderful aha moments they had just kind of dwindled into nothing because they were, head down straight away and didn't necessarily have the support they needed to figure out how to make these changes work in the real world. And so coaching was one of the things that I stumbled across way back then. And it started off as a transfer of learning type of thing, and then it blossomed from there, figuring out how else to be able to use it, not necessarily attached to training. But yeah, that is the start of my journey into coaching.
Given all the interesting things that you could have focused on in coaching, how did you decide to develop your interest around the things that you're most known for?
Yeah, so I'm really known in the coaching community for mentor coaching and supervision. And I got into that because, what I noticed was I really liked coaching coaches, and I liked working with coaches, and I liked the awareness that coaches seem to bring into sessions. And that was what got me thinking, so perhaps becoming a coaching supervisor would be something that I'd love. And I did. And at about the same time, I also started mentor coaching to support people towards their credentials, and loved that too. So seeing coaches really blossom, whether they were talking about their coaching in coaching supervision or whether we were shining a light on their actual coaching within mentor coaching. So yeah, that's how I got into this aspect of working with coaches in supervision and in mentor coaching.
Well, and it seems to me that your books are really designed for coaches specifically. And so as you start looking at the books that you've been writing, and we'll talk about, coachability in a moment, but there seems to be this arc of interest, like you're starting to learn things. And so I'd love to hear more about what were the things that you were noticing that led to this impulse, a thoughtful, but definitely step that one has to take in order to go, I'm learning this stuff and now I must put it on paper.
Right. Yeah. So I had known for a long time that I wanted to write a book. I had been blogging when I was inside the organization I worked with. I'd been blogging there for about, 7 years, and, really cutting my teeth on learning how to write, learning how to find my voice, believing in that voice. So I had kind of got addicted to the dopamine hits of writing, if you like, and having people comment on my writing, even more dopamine hits. And so I knew that I wanted to, gather my thoughts into something more concrete. Not that blogging isn't concrete, but something that felt like, you could touch it and feel it and hold it in your hands. Yeah. And when a publisher came to an ICF conference in the UK and said, so I was presenting at the conference, and the publisher talked to all of the presenters on this particular year and said, have you got a book in you? I came up with 3 possible books that I could write, and she went for the mentor coaching one because she said, well, nobody else has ever written about that, so that would be a great niche book. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that I found with all 3 books is I wanted them to be totally unique, something that nobody else had written about, and a bit edgy. And so mentor coaching was all about, because as far as I could tell, there were no books on mentor coaching in the market. Mm-hmm. I did discover after I published that there was one in Spanish that I didn't know about, but there were no English language books on mentor coaching. So mine was the first. And then from there, the Transformational Coach came out of all of the work that I do as a mentor coach, realizing that coaches get stuck on old mindsets that are no longer serving them or their mm-hmm. clients. And it's very hard for them to change behavior if they haven't changed their mindset. So that's where the idea for the Transformational Coach mm-hmm. came from. How can I help coaches to recognize these limiting beliefs that came from parental introjections, peer introjections, school introjections, etc., etc. And so that was the birth of the Transformational Coach.
Well, and I have a couple questions about that book. So if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to ask you a couple questions around the Transformational Coach.
Yeah.
One of the things that you write about there, or you talk about, is spotting and changing these restrictive coaching mindsets. And what are some of the common limiting beliefs that you see coaches holding on to? And what is that process of unhooking or unlearning these habitual ways of thinking?
So one of the ones that coaches seem to resonate with most, or maybe push back on the most, is the one around interrupting. So many of our mothers and fathers taught us it was rude to interrupt. And so we carry this around with us into the rest of life, and into our coaching. It's rude to interrupt. We've got this little voice in our head and it will not go away. And it's really hard to release it because we heard it so many times as a child. It's rude to interrupt. Don't interrupt. Don't interrupt. Don't interrupt. So we don't interrupt as coaches. Mm-hmm. And the danger there is that listening is great. And, it is probably the first time that a thinker has been so exquisitely listened to in their lives. So I'm not saying listening is a bad thing. However, if they're telling the same old story that they've told their friend over a glass of wine, or they've told their mum, or they've told somebody else at work, if they're telling the same old story to us, the coach, it's not going to move them forward. So we need to have a different belief around interrupting and how useful it can be to get people into a new line of thinking rather than the old way of thinking. And so that's one of the biggies that people often say, gosh, yes, I really recognize that in myself, and I need to figure out how to untether myself from that parental interjection. And it is, much of that is about becoming aware of it in the first place, because so there's 83 mindset shifts in the book. And when people read them, it's like, oh, yeah, dull. Yeah, I do that, or I believe that. I hadn't realized that I believed it, or I hadn't realized it was getting in my way as a coach. And I hadn't realized until reading this mindset shift that I need to do something differently here, but I can't do something different until I believe something different. So it's untethering ourselves from that.
And even that awareness piece, right? Like, I mean, you need to have the awareness piece to even be curious on your own behalf about a mindset or a bias that you have, because the mindset that I'm really hearing you talk about is there's this bias that is a cultural bias. I think it's in many cultures about the rudeness of interruption. And it isn't, if I'm hearing you correctly, it isn't the interruption for any purpose. But it is the purpose of breaking either the cycle or the habitual way that the thinker is bringing the information forward repeatedly, because they are not just sharing it with us once and we go, oh, that's repeated thinking. We've heard it multiple times. They're talking to their husband, their wife, their friends, their coworkers, their everybody with the habitual thinking. And so part of the interruption is to go and break that through that, so that the awareness can be there. This sounds like a habit of thinking. Is there any place in here to be curious about how this is serving you, sort of thing?
Yes. Yeah.
This is such an interest. Oh, no, go ahead.
No, I was going to say it is all in service of getting them to new thinking. So all of these mindsets that I write about are about enabling the thinker to get to new thinking, not go over old ground. So, anything we can do to get them to new thinking.
Yeah. And so the thing that really is showing up for me too is that I hear this often, and I'm sure you do also in my mentor group coaching and in supervision. How do you determine the places to interject interruption? And I had a thought too, because I think there's another place where interruption might be useful. I'd love to hear your thinking on this, but I think there is a place also of interruption when the client or thinker is in that habitual way of communicating their story, whatever the story is. And there's a place where they actually have new thinking that shows up, but they don't even hear themselves because they're so busy in the habitual way that they are discussing their experience. And I think there's a little place maybe where we go, oh, wait a minute. You just said something that it sounds profound. I'm seeing you nod your head, but I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah. And, so many coaches would ask me, well, how do you know the difference between known thinking and new thinking? Well, to me, it's really clear when a person is moving into new thinking because they slow down to try to access this new stuff that they've never said before. And they also generally will look somewhere else in the room. They won't be looking at me or at the camera on Zoom. They'll be looking somewhere else to try and access this new thinking that they've never said out loud before. Or maybe maybe they have thought it internally, but they've never expressed it out loud. So those are the telltale signs for me that, that's looks like it's new thinking. And so that would be a place to pause and look at that in more detail, get really curious about that new thinking.
Yeah, I think that's such a crucial understanding. And I love the simplicity of like the thinker has slowed down, and that might be an indicator that what they're processing, whether it's in just their head or their entire body, it may, and to your point, it may be brand new. It may also be something they've been saying internally. They know it, but they haven't necessarily voiced it so clearly until this moment.
Yeah.
And that's a place to notice. And I really think when I think of working, the work I've done with people, I also really see people share these deep wisdoms and understandings, but they've become cliche to them. And so I think that's a place to really interject and say, whoa, stop the bus for a moment. And did you hear what you just shared?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
As you hear that again, how does that land on you? So that the thinker has the opportunity to go, oh, I'm not just saying it rote at this point. Now I've got to actually contemplate what those words mean to me.
Yes, exactly. And that's, where our curiosity in support of their curiosity comes in. So I have to admit, I hate it when coaches say at the beginning of a sentence, I'm really curious. Or maybe I could be curious for a moment here. I was like, you don't need to say that.
I'm totally guilty of that. Just so you know, Claire, I'm totally guilty of that.
Don't do it. The reason I say that is because our job is to be curious, and they know that that's our job, to be curious. We don't need to preface our powerful question with saying, I'm really curious about this. And also because it's not about my curiosity, it's about serving their curiosity. And so
that is a really good point.
We need to unattach ourselves from that preface to a question. So
one of my coach trainers said something. Her name is BJ Levy. I want to give her full credit for this because it came from her. I don't know if she came up with it on her own. She's super smart, so she might have. But she used to say, you know, we have a preamble, an amble, and a postamble. And so
Right.
in your question, let go of the preamble and the postamble and just amble. And that's what I'm really hearing you say, you know, like, let go of the setup. So I'm super curious, and let me ask you this question. And the reason I asked you this question was because, like, making it okay, and just stick to the question, the powerful
Yeah.
question, and let the person sit with it.
Yeah. And I think that comes from our coach. I think it might come from our coach training, where we are sometimes taught to have that preamble. I'm wondering, or I'm curious, or there are multiple other ways of having that preamble. And I also think it comes from a desire to soften ourselves and not be deemed to be overly challenging. And yet our role as coaches is to challenge. Otherwise, we're just having a cozy chat and we're not going to support them to move forward. So you've got two mindset shifts perhaps there in tandem that need some attention to be paid to them to enable us to move our skills, our behaviors as coaches, letting go of those old mindsets.
Quick interruption. And I just want to say thank you so much for being on my channel, for liking and subscribing to the work that I'm doing. It means a great deal to me, and I'm very appreciative of it. I also want to extend an invitation to my monthly Q&As so that you have an opportunity. If you're a coach, it's my treat. Sign up below or follow the link, and you can come each month and have an opportunity to get a resource development CCE, as well as participate in a really rich conversation about how we show up as coaches and what we would like to be playing with in our own work, basically. So you are invited, and thank you for being here. Yeah, well, and you talk about the power of marginal gains and that idea that small changes lead to significant outcomes and impact. And what you're really talking about here is, yes, your thinker needs to be having those marginal gains, but us as coaches and thought partners also need to be working on those marginal gains along the way. And this mindset shift is, if I notice this is what I'm doing, like I own that, I will start some sentences. And I think you're right about just soften the question. I think, I don't know if that is a gender bias to some degree also,
Maybe.
you know, I think there may be something there, but the softening of the setup to the question. And if that is something that I do, it's a place of opportunity for me as the thought partner to get curious about my own marginal gain in maybe just asking the question.
Yes. And that's what the transformational coach is all about. It's for the coach to discover the marginal gains that they can, or the shifts that they can make in order to do something just slightly different, a marginal gain in their coaching that will make maximal difference to the person we're working with. Yeah.
I really appreciate that. I think that's really important. I know you also talk about this movement away from transactional towards transformational coaching. And in your experience, what are the key differences, and how can coaches make this shift in their practice?
So the biggest one that I see is moving away from performance coaching and more into, I would call it transformational coaching. Maybe there's something of the existential in there, but it's about the being. So it's the being of the coach and the being of the individual that we're working with. So who is this person being. If they're working on, let's say, their how they show up as a leader. So who are they as a leader? Who do they want to be as a leader? Not what do they do as a leader, but how do they want to describe themselves? How would they want others to describe them in terms of how they show up? So the work that we do together would be much more around their being. And then the work that I do on myself needs to be about my being. How do I show up in the coaching room? And yes, we need to start with competencies to start with, absolutely. And then what's the next level of us understanding ourselves as human beings and being able to, go for some kind of vertical development in ourselves. That's what I think makes the difference.
Yeah, I mean, it really brings up like Lev Vygotsky's work around proximal growth in my mind as you're talking about that.
Yeah.
That sense of like learning ahead above ourselves and providing that sort of space to the thinker to learn at a head above themselves.
Yes. Yeah. We can so easily get stuck in where we are today, or what we believe to be true today, or how we act today. And yet, we've developed hugely to get to who we are today, and we could keep developing. So who is the person we are becoming as the coach, and also who are we enabling the thinker to become? So for me, transformational is about being, it's about becoming. I think there's probably something in there about belonging as well. What's the tribe that we feel that we belong to? And I think that changes over time. As we develop ourselves, we find different tribes that we belong to, or that we have some resonance or alignment with. So being, becoming, and belonging.
I love that. It aligns with me. So I feel a great deal of resonance with what you're talking about. Yeah. So, it's easy for me to be like, yes. Sort of switching gears into this idea of coachability, I'm really interested. I get this question a lot. I do a lot of demonstrations of coaching, and so I get a lot of feedback from people observing that coaching saying, yeah, but your clients or thinkers are easy and mine are incredibly hard. And I always sort of laugh because I wonder if I were it's not that I've never had a thinker that I'm working with who is maybe not quite ready for coaching. Like they're getting there, but maybe they're not quite ready for coaching. They need some other support systems first in order to be thinking, broadening their repertoire of understanding maybe. But I would love for you to define, you talk about it, this coaching readiness and coachability. How do you define it? And what are the indicators that people could be looking for?
Yeah. So I do think there's a difference between coaching readiness and coachability. Coachability, I believe we can draw that out of every person that we choose to start working with. And that coachability is all about building their thinking muscles. So that happens in coaching sessions. Coaching readiness, though, is the bit that I think we haven't paid enough attention to over time. And you notice I said there about we can cultivate the coachability of the people we choose to work with. So it is a choice about working with people. And unfortunately, our credentialing processes kind of drive behaviors that are around, I've got to accumulate lots of hours of coaching. And of course, we do need to make a financial living to be able to live. So that also drives us to choose to take clients who perhaps are not coaching ready. And therefore, if they're not so coaching ready, it's quite hard to build their thinking muscles from a coachability standpoint. So coaching readiness is about, is coaching the best fit intervention for the presenting need? And it might well not be coaching. So, for example, I had somebody the other day email me and ask me if I would talk to him about coaching for his emerging leaders in his organization. And my first question back was, is it coaching that you're looking for, or is it training? Because if these people have never had training in how to lead teams before, coaching is not going to cut it, because they need the training first, and then coaching can help them to apply what they've learned in their own style and choose what their own leadership style is. So I made that distinction for him, and he said, yes, okay, I hadn't realized that. It is actually training that I'm looking for. So I was able to refer him to somebody else for that. That's not what I do. So that's one example of where coaching wasn't the best fit intervention for the presenting issue. It could be that it's more like a mental health thing. It could be that the boss has not given the individual feedback and they're trying to outsource to a coach. There's all sorts of other interventions that it could be rather than coaching. Coaching is not the panacea for everything. We need to get really clear about when we offer coaching and when we say, actually, I suspect that it's one of these other things. And, so we need to do some screening, some proper screening to figure out, is coaching the right intervention? So that's one element. Another element is, have they got the support of, well, if it's through an organization, have they got the support that they need back in the workplace to be able to make the changes that they may decide they wish to make? So there has to be this systemic support. The coach and thinker cannot do this alone. And it's back to this thing I said earlier about, when a person goes back into the real world, can they put these changes into place? They can if they have the support that they need from the sponsor or the line manager or whoever else is in the organization. So that tells me that the organization is coaching ready because they've got something built around the individual to support them. Or if it's private coaching, then what other resources can they draw on to support them with these changes? Right. And then there's something about their motivation for coaching.
You have to be motivated?
Yes. So they can't be forced into coaching, or they can't feel obliged to have coaching just because their organization is paying for it. So there should be no obligation. It has to be voluntary. They have to understand what it takes, because thinking is hard work. And building those thinking muscles is hard work. They've got to know what they're letting themselves in for, and therefore they need to understand that this is not mentoring. It is something very other than mentoring. It is about them doing the thinking for themselves. So are they motivated to do the thinking for themselves and make changes? And then the last thing is this the right time for them as an individual and also for the organization, given what organizational changes might be going on around them, or given, their family circumstances, whatever. So there's those 4 things really that make up coaching readiness. And my belief is that we could work more with coaching custodians within organizations to get those coaching custodians to do that screening before we even get involved. Because what I notice is that coaching custodians, as I call them, often will kind of throw stuff over the fence at us coaches and say, have a chemistry session, see if this is a good fit, whether you can work together. And then the chemistry session ends up being all of that screening stuff, plus compatibility, plus contracting, plus. And then the chemistry session is just way too much. The purpose of a chemistry session has just been diluted if we try and do all of that. So what I'm angling for, if you like, is for us coaches to influence coaching custodians to do more of that setup, really good setup in the first place, because if that happens, the organization will get a much higher return on investment and return on expectations. Right. The thinker will also get more out of coaching, and we will feel more fulfilled because we'll be working with people who are coaching
having
ready.
More fun. Yeah.
Yes, we'll be having more fun. And it's not all about us, of course, but
no.
We are an important.
Having fun is fun. And I think that it sets up the relationship in such a way also that honors where the thinker is at. And I think it sets up the relationship to also, if the coach is having more fun, the presence, the attunement, all of those things, I would guess, are up so that the coach partner and the thinker are aligned better energetically for the deeper work of thinking. And to your point, I mean, it is hard to think. That is a skill set that our brain, just given the amount of glucose that's required to think new thoughts, our brain is predisposed to not think new thoughts because it might need that glucose for a tiger. Who knows, right? I need to run more than I need to think. And so I love that idea that what we're doing is we're priming the potential thinkers so that they're ready to go into a thinking partnership and into a thinking environment. Yeah. So I have a couple other questions about this book that I really want to ask. And it's interesting. In another podcast, I was talking to another Clare, and this idea of thinker came up versus client. And I just want to address that I have just taken a huge deep dive into Nancy Klein's work as a result of that conversation. And I am really appreciating your use of thinker versus client. I'm still in the in-between stage of moving from that language to the new language. But I love this idea that if we're the thought partner and they're the thinker, it really takes it has the thinker in a place of empowered agency and autonomy, and we're holding a thinking environment for the thinker to work on creating more white matter in their brain as they practice building this muscle. So I just wanted to acknowledge that real quickly also.
Yeah. And, you talk about agency, and that is so important to me, to enable them to feel that agency. And they can't feel that if we undermine their thinking by doing the thinking for them. If we start joining dots on their behalf, that stops them from thinking and joining the dots for themselves. And they might join different dots to the ones that we join anyway. So they need to join the dots, not us. So this is
we've stolen their learning from them.
Yes, exactly. And we know how important it is for other people to learn themselves, because only when they learn for themselves will they put things into practice. We know that as coaches, and yet we do these subtle things that steal their learning, as you've said. And one thing I would say about this term thinker is it's not perfect, because it still represents this. It sounds like it's representing the cerebral logical thinking. And actually what I mean by thinking is the whole body of thinking. Mm-hmm. And, how can we enable them to use all of their senses to access wisdom? So I wish I could find a tweaked version of thinker that allowed us to, understand that this thinking is the whole body thinking, and all.
Maybe it's the somatic thinker, but that starts to be very long.
Yes, and our thinkers, prospective thinkers, don't understand what somatic means. We know what it means, but they don't.
Right.
Not that I would usually tell them that I call them the thinker, but that might be part of a discussion at the beginning to say, I see you as the thinker, because that is the role that you're going to play here. I'm not going to do that thinking for you. So
well, and I am in alignment with this. I mean, when we think about our brain, it is a whole body system. I mean, our gut was our first brain. I mean, even a fruit fly has a gut system. I mean, that is our earliest brain. My guess is that all of our organs, as time goes on, we'll discover have thinking or elements of how we make information because of the release of different hormones and chemicals that come from the liver and the pancreas and all of these different elements within our entire bodily system all go into how we make decisions. And so I'm with you. I don't mean thinker as only a walking, talking head. I really mean it as that whole system of how you make meaning and how you discern and decide and develop things. And it doesn't just happen in your brain, although obviously our brain is a big component of that.
Yeah. And, one of the things that I think I noticed that coach training schools seem to, I'm not sure that they teach it, but it seems to be what coaches walk away with, is that we sit and we talk. And that's another mindset that we need to unlearn, because it's not just about sitting and it's not just about talking. Movement is so powerful in accessing something new. And, something like drawing. I asked one of the people I was working with this morning to draw, and, her first thought was, I'm a really rubbish drawer. I'm like, just see what happens. She saw what happened. It was amazing what she realized on drawing out her future vision. She got stuff that she wouldn't have got if she was just talking about it, and it was a real shortcut. So we've got to be using more of these different multiple intelligences.
I think it's also maybe a reason why sometimes having phone sessions versus Zoom sessions might be really useful, because I don't know about you, but when I'm doing a phone session, I'm walking in circles around my house, and it gets me moving, and my process is different I do a lot of moving even when I'm talking on Zoom, because I'm standing up and I just start anyway, I'm not going to go dive deep into that, but walking and talking while I'm on a phone is a great way to be very present with the person that I am working with. And so I think there's probably something to getting all of those, chemicals and hormones moving throughout our body as we're having a conversation that is probably pretty powerful.
Yeah.
And I think you're alluding to this in some of the things that you're talking about today, which is this coach's role as a catalyst rather than the creator of value.
Yeah.
And can you kind of share maybe what that looks like in practice, to this movement from catalyst to the I'm bringing value. I've got the value.
Yeah. So, again, this is another mindset shift. And this mindset was drilled into us at work, that I have to add value at work. And in order to add value, I have to be the one who does the thinking, and I have to be the one who creates stuff, and it's all down to me. Now, when we become a coach, we need to be letting go of that. And yet it is running through our whole core, because that is everything that we learned at work. And so it's a really tricky one to unburden ourselves from. But the catalyst version of a coach is the one who truly believes that the thinker is creative, resourceful, and whole, and doesn't just spout that as words on, a mantra or whatever. The amount of times I hear coaches use that expression, yes, my clients are creative, resourceful, and whole, and yet when I watch them coaching, they're not treating them as creative, resourceful, and whole, because the coach is doing the thinking on behalf of the individual. They're joining the dots, as I said earlier. That would be one symptom of being a value creator rather than a catalyst for value. Yeah. So it's these, again, they're marginal, and yet they're massive. To make that shift, to remove that out of our way of being.
Yeah. What does it take for the thought partner to give the dots back to the client or the thinker to do the work of it? And I mean, that's basically what you're saying, right? Like, give those dots back. They don't belong to you.
Yes, they're not your dots, and they might be the wrong dots anyway. So we need to be asking much more, more questions like, what are you noticing here, or which dots are you joining? Or rather than saying, so you've said this and this and this, and I'm drawing a conclusion that that's you, the coach, trying to add value because that's what you always did in the workplace. And that's not your role anymore as a coach.
Yeah. And this is a skill set we can learn. I mean, and that I think is what is so beautiful and hopeful about this, is that we as the thought partner can learn that, what got me here isn't going to get me there. If that's true in the business world, well, this is then true also in your coaching evolution, is that what got you here isn't going to get you there as a partner in this thought-provoking conversation. Yeah. And these little mindset shifts these marginal shifts are so crucial. I tend to call them, micro skills, like to pay attention to your micro skills. But I think we're talking different words for the same idea of like this little tiny piece to tweak and be conscious and aware of, that then allows you to show up differently. And I think there's a question here to the listeners about what would allow you personally to let go of the dots and hold the thinking environment for the thinker to do the work. And I think you're right. It goes back to this idea of value, the value that we bring.
Yeah. And those micro skill changes can't happen. Well, they can happen without a mindset shift. But when push comes to shove and we start to get anxious, or we are tired, or they invite us into doing more mentoring, for example, we'll end up reverting back to the old way of doing things if we have not worked on our mindset shift.
Yeah.
So that bit, we have to understand what is the mindset that we need to unlearn in order that we can then put the new micro skill into place.
Yeah. Beautiful. That's beautiful. I love it. I am curious, and I also want to be respectful of time, but I also want to really ask you, I mean, there is a lot that we've covered and talked about today. What is, or who is, or what philosophy, book, person has profoundly impacted you professionally, personally, in your own development and growth, besides yourself?
Well, lately, it has been working with a Gestalt therapist, and that focus of awareness of my different parts has been a game changer for me. Therapy, I put it off for I mean, I don't have big trauma in my life, and I notice how many of those mindset things have been getting in my way. So it's been so powerful to work with a therapist, and in this case, a Gestalt therapist. And where it's leading me to is the thought that I'd really like to understand this Gestalt thing from a coaching perspective now, so that I can bring more of that awareness to the people that I work with.
I'm sure you are, but Dorothy Simonovich,
I have come across her. Yeah.
I did a podcast with her in earlier season, I think season 2 or 3, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I had the most interesting experience when I was in grad school. I was becoming a social worker in grad school, and so I thought, well, and I'd been in some form of therapy since I was like 9, because my parents got divorced and my mom was like, hey, you need to be in therapy. So, but I chose it for myself, and I was in my kind of middle to late 20s, and I joined a empowerment group that ends up being me, 7 men, and a male leader, which just never happens. And he was a Gestalt therapist. And so we were all playing different roles for each other so that we could have those kind of, whether it was the empty chair or an actually filled chair, or just all the different conversations to challenge the way that we were reacting, responding, and perceiving our experiences and how we might rewrite that. And so I have a profound respect for Gestalt. I think it is an amazing way of working with our internal narratives, and also with our, just really with the deeper underlying mindsets that you're talking about, so that we can kind of clear out what's important and what we're just holding on to because it's baggage we've just been carrying for so long. We've been like, oh, I mean, like really, literally just put it on the side of the road and keep walking. I can do that. And so it was so powerful. So I love that. I think that's a brilliant experience.
And the thing that I think is so useful to us as coaches to remember is that we really need to have done this work on ourselves. If we are not prepared to do the work, then how can we expect other people to do their work in a coaching space or in any other space? So that's why that feels so very special to me, to be really doing work that is enabling me to become more of who I already am. So when I talked about the being and becoming and belonging, that's what therapy is doing for me right now.
Yeah. And it's not out there. It is, the same thing applies to us. It is in here. This is the space of our work. Yeah. So my final question to my guests each session or each podcast is I've started adding this into my podcast is, you don't know who it will be. I'm not yet sure who it will be, who this question will go to, but I would love to get, what is the question you might ask the next guest that I am going to be talking to?
Well, let's go with something around coaching readiness. And I'd like to know from your next guest, what do they consider before they agree to start working with somebody around coaching readiness?
I love that. And hold on one second. Which then leads me to my final question for you, which came from a prior guest. What is it that you do to keep yourself at that mastery level of coaching?
Oh, I'm back to therapy. Well, that's one thing that I do. Also, I continue to invest in mentor coaching for myself and my own practice. So having somebody else listen in with me to my recordings of my coaching. Because as I say in my mentor coaching book, mentor coaching is for life, not just credentialing. And then the third aspect is supervision, having a place to go to, clear those resourcing if I'm not feeling resourced, or talk about ethical issues, or talk about relationships that I have with the people that I'm working with. So those three, it feels like a triumvirate.
Yeah, I like it. The trifecta or the triumvirate. I love that. Claire, I just want to say how much I appreciate having this conversation with you today. Thank you so much for making the time.
And thank you for inviting me. It has been fun to kind of chew it over with you.